The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden light over the busy city street. People hurried along the sidewalks, some with shopping bags, others lost in conversation. The sound of cars and buses blended with the distant hum of construction, creating a familiar urban rhythm. In the midst of this ordinary day, a young girl in a wheelchair was slowly making her way along the sidewalk. Her movements were steady, practiced. She wore headphones, listening to music that made her smile softly, her eyes lighting up as she bobbed her head to the beat. There was a calmness in her expression, a small bubble of happiness she had built for herself in the bustling world around her. The street was alive with energy, but not all of it friendly. From around the corner, a group of bikers roared into view. Their engines were loud, a deep growl that turned heads. They rode with the kind of confidence that often borders on arrogance, leather jackets glinting in the sunlight. The leader of the group was a man who seemed to carry his bravado like a second skin. He revved his engine with exaggerated force, laughing as his friends cheered him on. It was clear that he thrived on attention. The louder and more noticeable, the better. When the man spotted the girl in the wheelchair, something in him shifted. A smirk crept across his face, and he slowed his bike to match her pace. He leaned toward her, shouting something cruel and mocking. The words weren't loud enough for everyone to hear, but they carried the weight of meanness, the kind of ridicule that makes people stop and notice. He made exaggerated gestures, pretending to imitate her movements as if they were a joke. His friends laughed, egging him on, and the girl felt a chill run down her spine. She tried to ignore them, focusing on moving forward, hoping that if she kept going, they would lose interest and leave. But they didn't. They lingered, circling her slowly, their laughter growing louder, sharper, more humiliating. People on the sidewalk noticed. A few frowned and shook their heads, uncomfortable with the display. Others pulled out their phones, the reflex to capture shocking behavior almost instinctive in a world wired for social media. Some whispered to each other, unsure if they should intervene. The city had its share of cruelty, and sometimes it felt like everyone was just a spectator. But as the girl pushed herself along, her face tightening with frustration, a different kind of presence entered the scene. A tall, muscular man stood a few steps away, near a small coffee shop, watching the street unfold. He wasn't loud or flashy, didn't rev engines or shout at anyone. He simply stood, calm and composed, yet impossible to ignore once noticed. His posture was relaxed, but there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, a kind of confidence that didn't need to be announced with noise or bluster. People might have passed by without giving him a second glance, but there was something in his eyes, focused, observant, alert, that hinted he did not tolerate injustice. The girl continued down the sidewalk, her eyes occasionally flicking toward the bikers. Fear mixed with anger as she tried to keep her balance and her dignity. The cruel man made another gesture, this one more exaggerated than the last, and the sound of his laughter cut through the air. The other bikers laughed too, but there was a tension building now, subtle but undeniable. The energy in the street had shifted. People were watching more closely. The moment was no longer just a cruel joke. It was a test of who would stand up and who would stay silent. The man near the coffee shop, unknown to the girl and the bikers, took a step forward. His movement was slow, deliberate, not aggressive, but intentional. There was no shouting, no sudden action, just a shift in presence that made the air feel heavier, charged. It was as if the entire street had subconsciously noticed that something important was about to happen. The biker, still laughing, had no idea that someone with quiet authority was observing him, someone who had seen enough of the world to know that cruelty, even small, needed to be confronted. The girl felt her energy starting to falter. The continuous mockery was exhausting, and she longed for it to end. She had faced challenges all her life, and while she was strong, the relentless cruelty of strangers could chip away at anyone's spirit. She kept moving, pushing herself along, determined not to let them see her break. Each push of her wheelchair wheels was an act of resistance, a silent declaration that she was not defined by the ignorance of others. Meanwhile, the biker, intoxicated by his own arrogance, had not noticed the subtle shift around him. He was lost in his performance, believing he was in control of the moment. His friends laughed louder, the sound echoing off the buildings. But even as the girl moved forward, her determination clear, the subtle awareness of the man by the coffee shop began to ripple outward. Passers-by began to feel it too, a quiet tension, the sense that someone was about to step in. The girl caught a glimpse of him, the tall man near the coffee shop, and felt a faint spark of hope. There was something about his stance, the calm way he watched, that suggested he was not just another bystander. He was different. She couldn't explain it fully, but she felt a sense of safety starting to grow, even in the midst of humiliation and fear. The biker, still oblivious, made one final mocking gesture, leaning dangerously close to the girl. The laughter of his friends grew louder, but there was now a faint ripple of disapproval from onlookers. Some muttered under their breath, others stopped in their tracks, uncomfortable with the cruelty unfolding before them. The energy of the street was no longer entirely in the biker's favor. The man near the coffee shop, John Cena, moved slightly, not toward aggression, but toward presence. His body language conveyed that he would not let the mockery continue unchecked. It was a calm, deliberate approach, the kind that commands attention without shouting. The biker, finally noticing, turned his head just enough to see him. There was a brief moment of hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty in his smirk. For the first time, he realized that he was being observed by someone far more imposing than himself. The girl, still moving forward, felt a surge of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone had noticed her struggle, someone who could intervene if necessary. It was a small, quiet reassurance, but enough to give her strength. Each push of her wheelchair felt a little lighter, her head held a little higher. As the biker continued, unaware that his arrogance had been noted and would soon be addressed, the city street seemed to pause. The engines of the bikes idled, the laughter momentarily subdued as the air grew heavy with anticipation. Something was about to change, though no one yet knew exactly how. The ordinary afternoon, filled with the usual hum of traffic and conversation, was about to become extraordinary. For the girl, the moment felt like it stretched in slow motion. Every movement of her wheelchair, every glance at the bikers, every breath she took carried weight. She was caught in a moment that was unfair, cruel, and exhausting, but also about to become a turning point in a story she would remember for the rest of her life. And there, standing calmly near the coffee shop, observing everything, John Cena watched with steady eyes. He did not rush. He did not shout. He simply prepared, knowing that when the time came, he would act in a way that made it clear cruelty would not go unanswered. The tension built, the air thickened, and the city street held its breath for the confrontation that was about to unfold. The girl in the wheelchair continued moving forward, her hands gripping the wheels tightly as she pushed herself along the uneven sidewalk. The sounds of the city, the distant honk of a taxi, the chatter of pedestrians, the rumble of buses, faded into the background as the weight of the situation pressed on her. Each laugh from the biker felt sharper, like it cut through the air and landed directly on her. The cruel words and mocking gestures that came from him were relentless, a constant barrage she had to endure. It wasn't just his voice. It was the energy he carried, the arrogance, the lack of empathy that made every step she took feel heavier. The bikers' friends were laughing too, their amusement echoing off the buildings around them. Their joy wasn't just in the moment. It was in the humiliation they were causing. It was a type of cruelty that often hides behind confidence, a belief that no one will challenge it. But today, that belief was about to be tested. The girl tried to ignore them, focusing on the rhythm of her music through her headphones. She hummed along softly, hoping to drown out the mocking laughter. But every time she thought she could pass, the biker would rev his engine, circle her wheelchair, and shout something cruel again. The sounds of his laughter and the roar of his bike blended together into a chorus of intimidation. People on the street began to notice more clearly now. Some stopped, unsure whether to intervene. Some whispered to each other, shaking their heads in disapproval. A few even pulled out their phones, capturing the incident. The city had become a living audience, watching the cruel spectacle unfold. It was a small thing, but it made the girl feel slightly less alone, knowing that her struggle was being seen, even if it wasn't yet fully supported. Meanwhile, the tall, muscular man who had been watching calmly near the coffee shop, John Cena, observed the scene with quiet intensity. He didn't move quickly or shout, but his eyes followed every motion, every mocking gesture from the biker. There was a tension in his posture that was easy to miss if someone wasn't paying attention, but it was unmistakable to those who looked closely. He was ready, waiting for the right moment to intervene, but he wasn't rushing. He knew that sometimes the best impact comes from timing, from a calm but unmistakable presence that shifts the balance of power without needing to fight. The biker, oblivious to Cena's watchful eyes, continued. He began to lean dangerously close to the girl's wheelchair, pretending to mimic her movements. His hands flailed in exaggerated motions, and he laughed loudly at his own act. The girl's heart pounded. Fear and frustration mixed together. And for a moment she froze, unsure if she should push forward or retreat. But she remembered all the times she had faced challenges before, and slowly, with effort, she continued. Her movements were steady, determined, but her energy was waning. As the biker's mockery escalated, the crowd around began to shift. People started moving closer, not to confront him yet, but drawn by the tension in the air. Some faces reflected discomfort, others anger, and a few were simply curious. The girl could feel the energy around her changing. The mocking had gone on long enough, and the spectators' eyes and whispers began to create an invisible pressure around the biker. John Cena's presence was subtle, but powerful. He didn't yell or charge forward, but the biker's actions were now being observed by someone who radiated authority. Cena's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the biker's chaotic energy, creating a tension that was almost palpable. He moved slightly, just enough for the biker to notice, and in that brief moment the biker felt a flicker of doubt. His smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, a tiny crack in the confidence he had built up. The girl sensed a shift too. She noticed the tall man stepping slightly forward, and a small spark of hope ignited inside her. She wasn't completely alone anymore. Someone had seen the cruelty, and it was clear that person was not indifferent. Her hands gripped the wheels with renewed determination. She pushed herself forward, her movements more purposeful, carrying not just her weight but also her dignity. The biker, growing more desperate to maintain control over the situation, made another mocking gesture. He shouted something cruel, but the words were met with a faint murmur of disapproval from the crowd. The laughter of his friends had begun to falter slightly, replaced by uneasy glances at the tall man nearby. The energy of the street was changing. Where before the biker had dominated, now there was a sense of balance starting to shift. The girl continued moving, trying to keep calm. Her breathing was steady, though her heart raced. She had learned over the years to handle challenges with quiet determination, but the cruelty of strangers always hit harder, because it was unnecessary and unfair. Each mocking gesture, each laugh directed at her, felt like a test of her patience and strength. But now, with Cena's presence, she felt a subtle reassurance that maybe this time, the test would not end in humiliation. The biker, oblivious to the full weight of the situation, decided to escalate further. He revved his engine even louder, trying to intimidate the girl with the roar of his bike. He circled her slowly, leaning close, shouting insults and laughter in equal measure. But the crowd's reaction was growing louder now, not in support of him but in quiet disapproval. A few people muttered under their breath, some shook their heads, and a few more held up their phones, ready to capture the incident for a wider audience. The sense of being watched, not just by the girl but by everyone around him, began to affect the biker. John Cena did not intervene yet, but his posture shifted slightly. His presence alone was enough to start influencing the situation. The biker began to notice him, the calm, confident figure who radiated authority without needing to raise his voice. For the first time, the biker's smirk faltered. The laughter of his friends became nervous, unsure of how to respond. The tension that had been building finally started to break through the biker's facade of confidence. The girl, feeling the change, pressed forward with more energy. Her face held a mixture of relief and cautious optimism. She had faced cruelty before, but this time there was someone ready to step in on her behalf. She could feel the weight of injustice slowly being challenged, and that alone gave her a sense of strength she hadn't felt moments before. The biker's laughter had faded into uneasy silence. The man who had been watching, Cena, hadn't spoken a word, yet his presence alone was making a difference. The girl felt a rush of gratitude and hope. Someone had seen the cruelty, had recognized it for what it was, and had decided not to ignore it. The energy in the air shifted, no longer dominated by mockery but by the quiet power of authority and the beginning of justice. The biker, finally noticing Cena fully, hesitated. His bravado was shaken, and the confidence that had driven his cruel actions began to crumble. The girl kept moving, her hands gripping the wheels tightly, but now with the knowledge that she was not alone. The street, once filled with the sound of mocking laughter, now held a tension that suggested change was coming. People around watched closely, sensing the turning point. Some whispered to each other, their expressions reflecting the shift in energy. The girl's determination, combined with Cena's presence, created a moment that was both quiet and powerful. It was no longer just an encounter between a cruel biker and a young girl in a wheelchair. It was becoming a lesson in courage, dignity, and the impact of standing up to injustice. The girl felt a small smile form on her lips. She wasn't entirely safe yet, but she could feel that the tide was turning. She had moved from fear to cautious hope, knowing that sometimes the courage of others can make a difference when it seems impossible to fight alone. The biker, on the other hand, had begun to sense that his arrogance had consequences, that his actions were being seen and judged not just by the girl, but by everyone around him. And so, the moment stretched. The girl continued moving forward. The biker hesitated and the street held its breath. The tension had built to a point where change was inevitable. The stage was set for a confrontation that would not only challenge the biker, but also leave a lasting impact on everyone who witnessed it. The ordinary city street had become a place of moral reckoning, and in that stillness the girl found strength. The biker found doubt, and John Cena stood ready, calm and unwavering, preparing to act. The street was tense now, filled with an almost electric energy. The girl in the wheelchair kept moving forward, her hands gripping the wheels tightly as she pushed herself along. Her breathing was steady, but her heart raced. Every moment of mockery from the biker had taken a toll, and yet she refused to let him see her weaken. Her head was held high, though a flicker of worry passed over her eyes. She had faced challenges before, but nothing like this, where strangers felt free to laugh at her pain. The biker had slowed down slightly, sensing that the energy around him was changing. The laughter from his friends was not as loud now. Their earlier confidence diminished. A few people on the street had begun to step closer, not aggressively but curious, drawn in by the shift in tension. Whispers ran through the crowd, eyes darting between the biker, the girl, and the tall man standing nearby. It was clear that the scene was no longer just a cruel joke. It had become a spectacle of accountability. The tall man, John Cena, had shifted his position slightly. His stance was calm but firm, his gaze fixed on the biker. He didn't raise his voice, but his presence alone carried authority. There was a quiet power in the way he held himself, the kind of confidence that commands attention without needing to be loud. The biker finally noticed him fully, and for the first time, doubt flashed across his face. He had been so certain of his dominance, so intoxicated with his own arrogance, that he had never considered being challenged by someone like this. The girl felt the shift immediately. She sensed that the confrontation she had feared was about to happen, but now she also felt a spark of hope. Someone had seen the injustice and they were about to act. Her hands moved faster on the wheels, her determination renewed. She had faced cruel people before, but there was something different about this man. He radiated authority, not anger, and that made her feel safer. The biker, trying to regain his confidence, made another mocking gesture, leaning close to the girl's wheelchair. He shouted insults and gestures, but his words seemed to falter in the presence of Cena. The laughter from his friends had almost completely stopped, replaced by uneasy glances and nervous movements. The atmosphere on the street had shifted from amusement to tension, and the biker could feel it, even if he couldn't yet understand why. John Cena began to step forward, not aggressively, but with deliberate purpose. Each step was measured, calm, and unwavering. His eyes never left the biker, and his expression remained composed, but it was clear that he would not tolerate cruelty. The crowd began to notice the movement, the subtle change in the balance of power. Whispers spread through the street. People instinctively moved slightly closer, sensing that something important was about to happen. The biker for a moment laughed nervously, trying to cover his fear with bravado. But it didn't work. The calm authority of Cena was overwhelming. The biker realized that his arrogance had finally met someone who would not be intimidated by it. His smirk faltered, his gestures became less exaggerated, and the confidence that had driven his cruelty began to crumble. The girl, pushing forward, could feel her own hope growing. She had been humiliated, but now she saw that someone was about to stand up for her. She felt a rush of relief and gratitude, mixed with the lingering tension of the moment. She knew that the confrontation could change everything. not just for her but for the biker and the people watching. The street had become a stage for something bigger than herself. A lesson in respect, courage, and accountability. Cena stopped a few steps away from the biker, close enough to command attention, but far enough to avoid physical confrontation. He spoke in a calm, firm voice, each word deliberate and clear. It's not right to mock someone for who they are. You need to understand the impact of your actions. The biker froze, caught off guard. He had expected laughter, resistance, maybe even fear, but not a calm, composed confrontation. Cena's presence alone was enough to make him pause and reflect. The crowd watched silently. The city street had fallen into an unusual quiet. Even the distant sounds of traffic seemed to fade as everyone's attention focused on the moment unfolding. People felt the power of witnessing justice being quietly and firmly delivered. It wasn't dramatic yelling or violence. It was calm authority, and it carried far more weight than any shouting could. The biker stammered, trying to respond, but his words came out jumbled and unsure. The arrogance that had driven him to mock the girl was gone, replaced by a nervous realization that he had crossed a line. He tried to laugh it off, make a joke, but Cena didn't let him escape so easily. The calm firmness in Cena's voice and posture made it clear that this was a moment for reflection, not deflection. The girl, still in her wheelchair, watched the interaction with wide eyes. She felt a mix of relief and amazement. The fear that had weighed on her moments ago was fading, replaced by the knowledge that she was being supported. Cena's intervention was not just about stopping the biker's cruelty. It was about showing her and everyone else watching that standing up against injustice is possible. The biker's friends were now silent, shifting nervously. They had laughed without thinking, but seeing Cena confront their friend made them realize the weight of their own behavior. Some glanced around at the crowd, feeling the disapproval of others, and their laughter completely vanished. The dynamic had changed. The arrogant group that had mocked someone weaker was now shrinking under the pressure of observation and authority. Cena continued speaking, his tone calm but firm. Everyone deserves respect. Your actions can hurt people more than you realize. You have a choice now. Understand it or continue living in ignorance. The biker, feeling exposed and humbled, nodded slightly. There was no more smirk, no more laughter, just a quiet realization that he had made a mistake. The energy in the street had shifted completely. The girl felt a tear slip down her cheek. Not from sadness, but from relief and the overwhelming sense of being seen and protected. For the first time in minutes that had felt like hours, she could relax slightly, knowing that someone powerful and compassionate was standing up for her. The moment was transformative. She felt a mix of emotions, pride in herself for enduring, gratitude for Cena, and a faint hope that maybe, just maybe, the world could be kinder than it sometimes appeared. The biker finally lowered his head, the arrogance drained from his posture. He realized that his cruelty had consequences, not just for the girl but for himself and those around him. The laughter that had driven the moment was gone, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of his mistake. Cena's presence had not only stopped the immediate cruelty, but had created a moment of reflection, a chance for learning. People in the crowd started to breathe a little easier. Some whispered words of encouragement to the girl. Others nodded in approval at Cena's handling of the situation. The street, which had moments ago been dominated by mockery and cruelty, now felt charged with respect and awareness. The simple act of standing up calmly and confidently had shifted the entire scene. The girl, now feeling safer, pushed forward a little more easily. Her head was held high, her hands steady on the wheels. She had been challenged and mocked, but now she had seen courage and justice in action. It was a lesson she would carry with her forever, that sometimes the world is cruel, but there are people willing to stand up for what is right, even when it's difficult. The biker, humbled and quiet, finally looked away. His friends were no longer laughing, and the energy of the group had shifted from arrogance to reflection. Cena remained calm, watching carefully, ensuring that the lesson had landed. The girl passed by slowly, still cautious, but with a sense of relief and dignity restored. The encounter had ended, but the impact of what had happened would remain in everyone's mind. The city street returned to its usual rhythm, but the moment had left a mark. The girl felt empowered. The biker had learned a difficult lesson, and the bystanders had witnessed a powerful example of calm, firm intervention. It was proof that cruelty can be challenged, and that standing up for what is right can make a lasting difference. For the girl, it was a turning point. For the biker, it was a humbling experience. For everyone watching, it was a reminder that courage and compassion can exist even in ordinary places, even on an ordinary city street. And John Cena, calm and unwavering, had reminded the world that sometimes the most powerful action is not in yelling or fighting, but in standing firm, speaking truth, and showing respect for those who deserve it. The biker had finally stopped laughing. The arrogance that had fueled his cruel actions seemed to have completely drained away. He sat astride his bike, the engine still idling, but his body language told a different story. There was tension in his shoulders, a hint of uncertainty in the way he looked around. He had realized, perhaps for the first time, that mocking someone weaker than himself wasn't just a harmless joke. It was a choice, a reflection of character, and he was now confronted with the consequences of that choice. The girl in the wheelchair had paused for a moment, catching her breath and letting the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly fade. She felt relief, yes, but also a mix of lingering fear and disbelief. She had endured the mocking, the gestures, and the laughter, but someone had finally stepped in. That someone, John Cena, had not shouted, had not raised a fist, yet his presence alone had carried authority, and it had changed everything. She felt a warm sense of gratitude swell inside her. The crowd around the scene had shifted as well. Passers-by who had stopped to watch were now murmuring softly among themselves. Some nodded approvingly, while others whispered words of encouragement to the girl. People had witnessed a moment that went beyond simple street drama. They had seen an example of courage, empathy, and quiet authority in action. The atmosphere of the street was transforming from tension to reflection, from cruelty to awareness. Cena's voice cut through the low murmurs, calm but firm. "It's not enough to simply stop," he said, addressing the biker. "You have to understand why what you did was wrong. People like her face challenges every day, challenges you will never understand. Mocking them doesn't make you strong, it makes you small." The biker flinched slightly. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came. He realized that this wasn't about a simple apology. It was about facing the reality of his behavior. The girl watched the interaction, her eyes wide. She could feel the biker's embarrassment, but more importantly, she could feel the lesson being delivered. She had endured cruelty before, but never in a way that forced someone else to confront it so directly. She felt empowered by the calm authority of Cena, by the way he spoke not with anger but with certainty. She realized that standing up for oneself isn't always about confrontation. It can also be about having someone else model respect and dignity in action. The biker shifted uncomfortably on his seat. His friends who had laughed and encouraged him earlier were now silent, avoiding eye contact. Some glanced at Cena with unease, sensing the weight of the lesson being delivered. The atmosphere among them had changed completely. Where there had been arrogance and mockery, there was now reflection and uncertainty. Even the loudest, most confident member of the group had been humbled. Cena continued, his tone calm but unwavering. "You have to ask yourself why you thought this was acceptable. What did mocking someone weaker give you? Nothing. It only shows a lack of empathy and respect. You have a choice now. Learn from this or continue living with the smallness of cruelty." His words landed heavily. The biker's posture slackened, his head lowered, and he finally muttered almost inaudibly, I understand." It wasn't a loud confession or a dramatic apology, but it was sincere. The girl felt a sense of closure wash over her. The fear and humiliation that had plagued her moments ago were now replaced with relief and a quiet pride. She had endured the cruelty, and now she had witnessed accountability. She felt stronger, not just because someone had defended her, but because she could see the impact of moral courage in action. For the first time in the encounter, she allowed herself a small smile, a recognition of her own resilience and the power of justice done calmly and wisely. The biker's friends began to shift uncomfortably as well. They had laughed without thinking, encouraged cruelty, and now they were witnessing its consequences. Some glanced at the girl with shame, realizing for the first time the impact of their actions. Cena's presence had not only addressed the biker's behavior, but had created a ripple effect, prompting reflection among the group and everyone watching. The quiet authority he wielded spoke louder than words or anger ever could. The girl pushed herself a few more meters forward, feeling the cool air brush against her face. She could hear soft whispers from the crowd, people encouraging her, acknowledging the lesson that had been taught. She realized that this moment was bigger than her own struggle. It was a reminder to everyone watching that cruelty has consequences, that arrogance and mockery can be challenged, and that standing up for what is right can change the course of events in ways small and large. Cena's eyes remained on the biker. He wanted to ensure the lesson was understood fully. Respect isn't about fear. It's about understanding, empathy, and the courage to do what's right. You've seen the impact of your actions. Now make the choice to grow from this, not just for yourself, but for others around you. The biker nodded again, more firmly this time. The realization had set in. Mocking someone weaker did not elevate him. It diminished him. The girl continued down the sidewalk, her hands steady on the wheels, though she still felt the weight of the encounter in her chest. She had survived the humiliation, but she had also witnessed something extraordinary. She had seen justice delivered without violence, without shouting, but with clear authority and moral courage. She understood that true strength wasn't about dominance or intimidation. It was about standing for what is right, even in small, everyday moments. The biker remained seated on his bike, silent and reflective. The arrogance that had driven him moments ago had been replaced by awareness, perhaps even regret. His friends, too, seemed changed. They no longer laughed or made jokes. Some looked at the girl with guilt, while others simply remained quiet, absorbing the lesson Cena had imparted. The energy that had once been cruel and mocking had shifted entirely. The crowd began to disperse slowly, some returning to their routines, but many carrying with them the memory of what they had witnessed. It was a lesson that didn't require dramatic confrontation or anger. It was subtle, powerful, and lasting. People had seen someone stand up for what is right, and in doing so, had created a moment of reflection for everyone involved. The girl, feeling a mix of relief and empowerment, looked back briefly. She saw Cena standing calmly, watching as the scene settled. He gave a small nod, an acknowledgement that the lesson had landed. It was not a triumphant gesture, not boastful, but simply a recognition that balance had been restored. The biker's expression had softened, no longer filled with arrogance, but with a quiet understanding of what he had done wrong. The girl pushed herself further down the sidewalk, her heart lighter with every movement. She had faced cruelty, endured it, and witnessed accountability. It was a transformative experience, one that reminded her that even when the world seems harsh and unfair, there are people willing to stand up for what is right. And that made all the difference. The biker finally spoke softly to his friends, urging them to move on, to leave the street. They complied quietly, their laughter and arrogance gone. The lesson had been absorbed, silently but deeply. They would remember the encounter, not just because they had been confronted, but because it had forced them to see the consequences of their actions. Cena remained for a moment longer, ensuring that the girl was safely on her way and that the biker's group had dispersed. He didn't shout or celebrate. He simply ensured that fairness had been restored and that the girl felt supported. Then quietly he stepped back, blending into the crowd once more. The street returned to its usual rhythm, but the impact of the encounter lingered for everyone who had witnessed it. For the girl, the experience became a source of empowerment. She realized that her strength was not only in enduring adversity, but also in recognizing the courage and justice that others could bring into her life. She had seen firsthand that one person, calm and firm, could challenge cruelty and create change. She felt hope, not just for herself, but for a world where people could make a difference, even in small, quiet ways. The biker, humbled and reflective, had learned an important lesson. He had seen that mocking someone weaker does not make you powerful. It only diminishes your own character. He would carry that lesson forward, hopefully choosing empathy and respect over arrogance and cruelty in the future. The crowd, now dispersing, carried the memory of the encounter with them. They had witnessed a quiet yet powerful example of courage, compassion, and moral authority. It was a reminder that standing up for what is right does not always require confrontation or anger. It can be calm, firm, and deeply impactful. And so, the street, once filled with laughter and cruelty, returned to its ordinary rhythm. But the events of that day left a lasting mark on everyone involved. The girl, the biker, his friends, the bystanders, and the one person whose quiet strength had changed everything. It was a moment that reminded everyone that respect, empathy, and courage can shine through even in the smallest, most ordinary places. The street slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The sounds of traffic, People chatting and distant construction filled the air once again, but the memory of what had just happened lingered. The girl in the wheelchair felt a mix of relief, pride, and quiet amazement as she continued down the sidewalk. She had faced cruelty, endured mockery, and survived an experience that had been intimidating and unfair. And yet she also felt a deep sense of empowerment. Someone had stood up for her, not with anger or violence, but with calm authority and moral courage. That presence had shifted everything. She pushed herself a little further, her hands steady on the wheels, her heart lighter than it had been moments before. The city street that had felt harsh and unwelcoming now seemed different. It was still noisy, still crowded, still full of strangers, but in the midst of it all she had witnessed something extraordinary. She had seen justice delivered in a way that didn't humiliate anyone, didn't escalate conflict, and yet left no doubt about what was right. She felt grateful, not just for her own experience, but for the reminder that the world is not always cruel, that there are people willing to stand up and do what is right. The biker, who had mocked her just minutes ago, had finally moved on. His friends followed quietly, subdued by the experience. The arrogance and laughter that had filled the street were gone, replaced by reflection and awareness. He had learned a lesson, not through anger, not through confrontation, but through the calm, firm presence of someone who refused to ignore injustice. That lesson would stay with him, silently reshaping how he saw his own actions and the consequences they carried. The girl looked back briefly, catching sight of the tall man who had intervened. He was no longer stepping forward or speaking. He had done what he needed to do, ensured that the moment had made an impact, and now he simply blended into the crowd. There was no need for applause, no need for recognition. His satisfaction came from knowing that justice had been served, that the girl had been supported, and that the lesson had reached those who needed to hear it. The girl felt a warm sense of gratitude, not just for his action, but for the quiet courage it represented. As she continued, she realized something important. Her experience was no longer just about her. It was a reminder to everyone who had watched, a lesson in empathy, respect, and accountability. People had seen firsthand how cruelty can be challenged and how standing up for someone vulnerable can make a lasting difference. The biker's arrogance had been checked, his friends had learned humility, and the girl herself had gained a sense of empowerment that would stay with her for a long time. The bystanders who had paused to watch were now leaving, some whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed. They carried with them a memory of courage and integrity. For some it was a quiet inspiration, a reminder that they too could act when they saw injustice. For others it was a moment of reflection, a chance to consider how they treated others in their own lives. The impact of the encounter rippled outward in ways that could not be measured immediately, but would be felt for a long time. The girl felt a sense of relief wash over her. The fear and tension that had dominated her moments earlier were replaced by clarity and confidence. She had endured, she had survived, and she had witnessed someone stand up for her in a way that was both respectful and powerful. That memory would stay with her, a source of strength in moments when she felt uncertain or challenged. She realized that courage comes in many forms, not always loud or dramatic, but sometimes quiet, calm, and unwavering. The biker had moved on, but the lesson lingered. He would remember the calm authority that had confronted him, the way his arrogance had been met not with aggression, but with moral clarity. It was a lesson in humility, empathy, and respect, and it had reached him in a way that words alone might not have. He had learned that mocking someone weaker doesn't make you strong. It only reveals your own limitations. The impact of that realization would likely stay with him far longer than any argument or fight could have. For the girl, the experience was transformative. She had faced cruelty, but she had also witnessed accountability,